Okay, so I'm re-recording this because I didn't save. Um, all right. So healthy hormones, healthy cycles, understanding hormones and celebrating the divine feminine. All right, so let's see if I can get my clicker. Yes, why we're here, right? So kind of a multitude of reasons. One, just because we're not taught this stuff. And then I would just say because our normal functions are shamed in society, not honored. Typically throughout history, medicine wasn't really practiced on women. Women are seen to be hysterical. Even in conventional medicine, when I worked in the hospital setting, younger girls were coming in with like female imbalance problems, and we're like, oh, it's just your period, like just being a woman, which is not true, right? So instead, of honoring normal functions and understanding the female body, instead, I feel like it's kind of shamed in society. So just bringing some light, shedding some light on that. So we don't feel like we're broken and we can learn how to heal ourselves and to work with our wonderful bodies that we're given. So also, I feel like I was working at farmers markets last year and I had a lot of women come to me like, do you have anything that can like turn off my hormones, right? Or do you have anything like I'm getting a hysterectomy soon just to like shut this down, right? Um, and so instead of being like looking at the root cause, what's going on? Why are our hormones out of balance? Instead, we're just trying to like shut hormones off. And women by nature have hormone fluctuations, right? And so understanding that can be really helpful, and also prevent some maybe unnecessary surgical interventions. Or, just when we're going into our primary care physician, instead of being prescribed, anti-anxiety meds or antidepressants or birth controls to shut down our feelings of our hormones, right? Like, how do we honor that? How do we live with them? How do we get them in balance? So, a little bit about the agenda is like, what are hormones, anyways? The importance of hormone health, why this stuff is so important, taking a top-down approach to hormones, deciphering what's normal, right? And then why hormones get out of balance and how to bring them back into balance, right? And then the last part of this is obviously like how to use your cycle as a healthy vital sign to your hormone health. So, what even are hormones, right? So, hormones are chemical substances that are made in the body by one gland, and they are released into the bloodstream so they can travel and dock on a target organ or a target gland. And when they dock on that target organ, it tells that organ to like do its job, right? Um, so really they can be seen as the messengers in our body. And so why balanced health or hormones are important, right? So when hormones are balanced, it manifests as like this peaceful, even keeled nature. When we feel regulated, the body feels safe enough to perform all of its functions, right? We all want that. We're all deserving of that. We're all deserving of feeling good, having good energy, peace of mind, and eased monthly symptoms, right? So instead of maybe blaming our hormones, like I said, I was just hearing this so often, like, how do we turn down these pesky hormones? Or like, oh, like, she's so hormonal. Um, when our hormones are off, it's not the hormone's fault, but instead it's the hormone that is responding to something, right? Like there's an imbalance in the body, and our hormones are trying to let us know that there's an imbalance. So instead, can we look at them as the messengers that they are? What messages are they trying to tell us? What is going on at the root level? What's going on underneath, right? And so instead of saying this pesky hormones, can we reframe and say, what is my body trying to tell me? And I recently posted about this like plant analogy, but if we have a garden, if we have these plants, right, and we go out and we see it's like wilting and it's yellow, right? Like that's not the plant's fault. What is going on underneath? What's going on with the plant, right? Like, is it the soil? Is it not enough sun? Is it not enough nutrients, not enough water, right? Like the yellowing and the wilting is telling us something. It's a message that something's off, but we can't be like that darn plant, right? Like we need to course correct and adjust and look at what's going on underneath. So, what might imbalanced hormones look like for you? Um, this can range from things like mental health, anxiety, depression, fatigue, just like a poor outlook on life, dull, right? This is really how it manifested in my life when I was going to see primary care physicians. And like, I didn't have anything coming up on my labs necessarily, right? Like, they would do lab work. I'd be going and I'm like, something just feels off. And they'd be like, but your labs look great. I think a lot of us kind of, have heard this, even though we're like, is this it? Right? Like, and I'm like, no, this isn't it, right? Like, we don't have to feel this way. Um, but nobody ever asked me about like This is why I said I really like to use the cycles as a vital sign because if I would have known that, right, because I was having a lot of like missed and skip periods, things that weren't normal, my hormones were off, right? So if somebody would have been like, what's your period like? What is your menstrual cycle like, right? And then like even gotten deeper, like what's your nutrition like, your sleep, any of that? Because when I started to work on that piece, all of those symptoms resolved for me. But other physical things that it can look like are things like obviously infertility, irregular periods, heavy or absent periods, weight gain, um, hair loss or facial hair growth for women, low libido, low vigor, just feeling like something's off or unwell, right? So it can manifest as physical symptoms or psychological symptoms or both. And I would say just because these are common in our society doesn't mean that it's normal, right? It's like that analogy that we hear as a kid. If everybody jumps off the bridge doesn't mean that you have to do it either. So just because everybody's like on an antidepressant or just because everybody's feeling anxious or because everybody's periods, I feel like we're seeing this a lot more in society, right? Doesn't mean that it's normal. I would say a main part of that is because we're living in this what we like to call like an environmental mismatch, right? So we have these kind of ancient bodies or bodies that were built to be in sync with nature, and we're living in like a modern world that doesn't really honor our body's needs. So how is our hormones regulated? Where does it all start, right? And so starting from the top, hormone health starts in the brain, right? And why? In our brain, we have what's called the pituitary gland. It's also referred to as like the master endocrine gland, right? And it houses kind of those like first signaling messengers to the body, right? And it can be kind of compared to like as the conductor if you've been to an orchestra, right? It's the person who is sitting up top who is like setting the tone and setting the pace, like bump, 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 right? And then everybody else is following in line. Everybody knows the beat that's kept, everybody knows how to stay on track, right? So when it, why hormone health starts with the brain? Because when that conductor goes offline, right? When the brain perceives any sort of stress, it can really muck up the pituitary gland. It can really muck up that signaling. And if that's mucked up, then those target organs aren't getting the proper signal that they need, right? So instead of like the nice even pace, it could be that the pituitary is like kind of everywhere, right? And then everybody like is like, I don't know, like, are we supposed to play and do the thing? Like, I'm not really sure, right? So we have to start at the top, at the brain. And I know a lot of times in conventional medicine, they like to go like directly to the organ system. So this is why I'm like, hysterectomies are now one of the top 5 surgeries performed. Not knocking conventional medicine. There's always a time and a place. But just to go in and be like, oh, your hormones aren't regulating correctly. We're going to just remove the uterus, right? For women, the ovaries are like our little hormone producing factories. Instead of why is this off in the beginning, right? Like starting with that first domino. And so, how the brain perceives stress, um, we have 2 responses in our autonomic nervous system, either like the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, right? Fight or flight, rest and digest, but they can't both be on at the same time. It's one or the other. And if we're under a stress response, our body's main priority is to keep us safe and keep us alive. Um, Run from the fight or the threat, and the body releases cortisol, our stress hormone, right? And when this happens, it's pulling nutrients into the stress response and out of that like hormonal response, that good rest and digest response, right? So when we're constantly in a stress state, it's down regulating all of our like sex hormones and our gut health and things that we need to like kind of really like flourish and thrive. So yes, while we might still be alive, because that's what the body is doing, we're not thriving. And so from a female perspective, the body thinks like, this isn't time to bring a baby into the world. Like she's under stress, whatever it is, there's not enough nutrients, and will shut down our normal hormone cycles or just kind of gets out of whack. And so once again, I would say that stress in our society is kind of like deemed as being normal, or we're all told like we need less stress, but like, do we have the follow through? Not always, especially as women. Um, but it doesn't come without a long-term cost. I would also just say like as women, we have this added responsibility. Like I see a lot of women like breaking the glass ceiling, CEOs, like that bad bitch mentality, like doing the thing, but also still doing all that divine feminine at the same time, right? So like being the wife, being the mother, um, taking their kids to all of like, the soccer things, doing all the things, still cooking, still cleaning, and having all of this added stress. And then like on top of that, societal stress, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. And like I said, like this just doesn't come without a long-term cost. So when we're looking at healing our hormones, we have to get like really diligent about stress prevention and brain health. And so what even is stress to the brain, right? Things like financial, career, obviously something physical like an injury or illness, emotional, relationship, familial stress, environmental, so things like toxins that we'll talk about later, and then things like physical, like over exercising or under eating, right? So like not having enough nutrients in the body can be a stressor to the brain. Like I don't have enough to do the jobs that I need to do, right? Um, aggressive fasting, disordered eating, yo-yo dieting, imbalanced blood sugar, all of these can kind of like take, like I said, the blood sugar goes up and down, right? And that's also a stressor to the body. So first and foremost, right, we need to address how stress shows up in your body, right? Everybody's kind of unique in this, but I would say some of the most common signs would be things like a clenched jaw or tight shoulders or a rapid heart rate, right? Um, shallow breathing, the inability to like just like let go and relax. So the first thing is just like getting familiar with your stress response. What does that look like for you? And then if you're having a stress response, that your rest and digest response is off, right? Like because we can't be in both at the same time. And then you're not getting the benefit of those um, feel good hormones. And so if we're having a stress response, if we're triggered, one, can we just recognize and realize that this does not come without cost, right? Um, two, is there a way that we can reframe it to make the body feel safe, right? So if it's like something we actually cannot control, can we at least nurture ourselves during that time period? Can we at least, set up space for ourselves? Can we at least tell, if it's something we can't control, like this is temporary or like I'm safe, whatever kind of mantra that you need to use to make the brain feel like it's a little bit safer. And then if it's something that we need to address, like making a change in our life. So if you start to notice, like I have a lot of these feelings if I'm like talking to this one person, like it could be time to maybe reevaluate that relationship or restructure that relationship, right? And maybe if you're feeling like that way in work, is this the correct career for you, right? And that's not to say that we can all just leave our jobs at like the drop of a dime, but it could just be something like I might just kind of like revamp my resume and I'm looking towards making changes that align with me, right? So how do you de-stress, right? I really love inner child work. That was something that's really been pivotal for me because it shows me where a lot of my like reactions come from and then how to reframe those. And there's like lots of inner child workbook, like journals that you can do. Breath work is really important to me. I do this like once or twice a week. Swimming, biking, a walk, like having a like, a good time with a friend, writing it out, shaking it out, dancing it out, yoga. I have physical fitness with some asterisks just because some people I don't want to over exercising can be a stress, right? So maybe if you're working on balancing hormone health, not doing like the HIIT and the CrossFit and the Orange Theory, but still maybe like lifting some weights and getting a little bit of that stress released. Meditation and prayer, talk therapy is always valuable, right? Like a bath, something like that. And that's not to be like a bath is going to take away all my stress, but just implementing a routine practice to continue to fill up your own cup. And then maybe like a little journal prompt for you could be, how could managing your stress benefit your life and your hormones, right? I also just want to tie in. I think that as women, we feel guilty for taking time for ourselves. And like I said, like the modern woman is just busy, right? Like, especially if you're a mom, especially if you're a wife. I mean, but just being a woman alone is just, I would say, like, just has demands, right? And so, but we have to know if we're not filled up, um, if our cup is empty, then we can't pour into other people around us, right? And so it's not selfish to take care of ourselves. It's not selfish to do self-care, right? That's like one of the most loving things that we can do for ourselves, um, especially when we're working on like balancing hormones and all of that as well, right? Healing. So herbal support, right? We can't out supplement a stressful lifestyle. And I have had people reach out to me on social media or just like working at farmers markets and being like, okay, like I'm stressed, like what's the herb to take? And I'm like, okay, like, well, we have to do all of those things that I just talked about as well, right? Like get to the root of your stress. What are we implementing, right? Like, are we talking to somebody, right? We have to maybe like restructure our lives a little bit, right? Because if we continue to show up and do the same life and like try to throw herbs on top of it, that's not going to be the fix all. But herbs can definitely be beautiful support in the meantime while making changes, right? And so some of the ones that I really enjoy and really love myself are ashwagandha, which is an adaptogen, so to help us adapt to stress, right? Working more on that brain piece. Licorice root, also working on the HPA, the brain piece as well. It's called like the great hormonal harmonizer. Um, I always like I have obviously caution and cardiac history. And I do ashwagandha and licorice root every morning with milk thistle as a tea. I boil it on the stove, let it like steep for like 15 minutes, strain it off, and that's kind of like my daily routine. And sometimes I think I don't need it, and then I'll go like a week without it, and I'm like, what's going on? It just gives me this nice like underlying feel good, right? But other ones are milky oats, which is a nervine, good for like really frazzled energy, kind of feeling burnt out, like crispy. It's very nourishing. Skullcap is an anxiolytic for anxiety. Tulsi and lemon balm are very uplifting. So good for like depressive states or feeling just like low and gloomy. When you crush them, they have a really aromatic and uplifting smell. So I love those for like a lower period, maybe like in the winter months. Motherwort, I love her so much. I have some growing in my garden. It's lovely. But motherwort is really great for anxiety. Very bitter. So I like it as a tea. Most people do not. But I feel like divine feminine energy like drops into my body when I take motherwort. It is phenomenal. Almost a little bit sedative. So, but you will definitely like having if you're having an acute anxiety, this is really helpful, not something to take every day. And for that one, avoiding in cardiac history and hypothyroid. Um, and I would say don't overlook the basics. So things like chamomile and lavender are really great for relaxation. And then medicinal mushrooms are also really lovely. We make like a mushroom hot chocolate um, because they have adaptogen properties. So either picking one, like going to your local co-op, picking one of these that like really resonates and making a tea with it. I love tea form because it's the process and like honoring that like slowing down and like being with the medicine and ingesting it and like having the experience opposed to just like taking something in capsule and like moving on with our day, right? Like this forces us to slow down, which I really enjoy. Um, but if you're like, okay, like I don't want to like do something loose leaf and boiling stuff on the stove, totally fine. Just go grab yourself a bag of tea bags of whatever you like, right? And then when I do one-on-one work with people, this is something that we can do, right? Like what resonates with you, we can do custom tea blends that like feel really supportive to you. So a quick note on sleep cycles and hormones. Hormones are released cyclically throughout the day from the brain, right? And so if we think about nature, right, like nature's in cycles as well, like birds don't chirp at 2 in the morning, like they're in tune, everybody is on a cycle. And so the same with our hormones. And so if our sleep schedule is off, right, and this used to be me, I was a night shift worker, but if you're somebody who is going to bed at 9 and then 7 and then midnight and then 1, right? Like the brain can't really decipher like when's the proper time to be releasing stuff. Like it can't really get in the rhythm. So really working on getting a solid foundation for sleep. So trying to go to sleep and wake around the same time each day can get your body used to releasing hormones at regular scheduled intervals. Good tips for sleep are giving yourself a bedtime and sticking to it, right? So like let's say if you're gonna say I'm going to bed at 10, then around 9, starting to like unwind an hour before, getting a good book, sleepy time tea, dim the lights, light a candle, right? Trying to get in that rhythmic pattern, just how like, before electricity, we were obviously waking and sleeping with the sun, or you would have like a little like firelight glow or candlelight, right? So trying to kind of mimic that and not have the really bright like fluorescent lights having the screens in front of our face, because when we have that light, that blue light coming into our eyeballs, it is telling the brain like, oh, we're not ready to release melatonin yet, that good sleep hormone, right? Like we're still up, it's still daylight outside, right? So we want to get back into that natural rhythm. Um, Avoiding stressful conversations and anxious and fear-inducing like media before bed, right? Um, Getting light into your eyes within 30 minutes of waking can be really beneficial for your sleep schedule. So some people would say that sleep health starts in the morning. So when we wake up, getting that sun in your eyeballs, getting outside for just like 10 minutes, right? Getting that sunlight to stimulate into the eyes and say, like, release cortisol. It's time to go, time to get on that schedule, on that cycle. And then if you're really struggling with like insomnia, um, reserving the bedroom for sleep and intimacy, right? So that way your body is kind of primed when you hit the bed, like this is only for sleep, like, right? Opposed to if you're doing a lot of work in bed, um, throughout the day, then you're not, the bed doesn't feel like just reserved for sleep. Daily exercise has been shown to be really great for sleep health. And then skipping the alcohol and late night meals both can really affect sleep quality. There's been lots of studies on alcohol, and while some people are like, well, it gets me to bed, but it doesn't give us that nice deep sleep quality. So skipping alcohol before bed. So just a quick recap on this section. Um, Stress can inhibit your hormones by affecting the signal from the brain, right? So we want to get that conductor back online. We want the brain to feel safe enough to like release hormones at the right time. Um, Stress can be from emotional or perceived or physical things, um, like an injury, relationships, work, finance, illness, under eating, just big life changes, right? Addressing these changes can alleviate stress and really support our hormone health. By implementing stress reduction practices, we can lower our stress and make our brain feel safe enough to release hormones properly. And then hormones are released cyclically throughout the day, and a consistent sleep schedule helps the body know when to release hormones at the right time. So, how do we eat for our hormone health, and what are the best foods for our body? So, the body has millions and millions of functions it performs with us without us even having to consciously think about, right? And so, the only thing that the body asks is that we give it the proper fuel. And I like to just give so much respect to the body that like we don't have to breathe and think about it consciously, or our immune system does its job and we don't have to think about it consciously, or like our kidneys filtering so we can pee, right? But the only thing the body is like, can we get the right nutrients so we can do all of those things? Um, Kind of like building blocks from Legos, right? And when we give it the nutrients, the body will pull these like Lego nutrient pieces apart and send it to where it needs to go to keep us in homeostasis, to keep our hormones balanced, our body balanced, right? And so I would also say like 100 years ago, we didn't have to eat for our hormone health. We just ate what came from nature, and we didn't really have like these hormone problems that we're having now. Um, and with the rise in fake food, it's no surprise that our hormones have run amok. So picking foods that support the body and support hormone health, right? So opting for things that are from nature, and avoiding things that are like inflammatory, foods that the body doesn't recognize. Because when that stuff comes into our body, then the immune system will like kind of mount an attack and goes haywire trying to decipher what to do with these like fake foods, right? I was just talking to my daughter, but I like to use the thought process of like our bodies are made of natural things, right? Like calcium and phosphorus and oxygen and all of these minerals that we also find in nature as well. So when we die, not to be morbid, but the body decomposes, right? And becomes the soil. And then plants use that soil and those minerals, right, to like grow their structures. And then we eat plants and they come back into our body, right? And so it's like we are same, one and one, recognize, right? Like we're made of the same molecules, so we recognize each other. But when things come into our body that are unrecognizable, all these things that are like packaged and genetically modified and scientifically engineered, that's not recognizable to the body. So when that comes in, the body's like, we don't know what to do with this, right? And the immune system kind of goes wild. So asking yourself, like, would my granny know what this food is, right? Or with this ingredients list, if you're buying packaged stuff, like, could I make this in my kitchen, right? Is it just really a simple ingredients list, like for bread, for example, like flour, water, yeast, opposed to something that's like 30 ingredients long. I would also just like to say, like, this is not like a knock at anybody. And I would say this is not anybody's fault. This is like really marketing at its finest. Um, when you start to like look into and read like in the 40s and 50s and 60s when they started to market a lot of this food to women, right? Like, oh, like women can like leave the household now and like you can still feed your family. Just like pop this whole meal in the oven, right? And it like really feels like a great idea. It feels convenient because women finally got this like, oh, we can relax now, right? And now you go into the store and it's like all of these convenient meals and things marketed towards kids and like all of these bright colors. Um, and you can like grab things quick and like put it in your mouth and into your belly and like still run a full day. And so like it's not our fault that like that seems like a really nice thing, right? Like I get it, but we're also seeing that with the rise in that, we're also seeing the rise in chronic illness. We're also seeing the rise in like women having a lot of struggles with hormone health and not feeling great. And so, like I said, like I don't know if it was intentional. I would say not anybody's fault, but it's like just something to be aware of, right? And so now we're getting back into noticing like, okay, well, that didn't work. So like, how do we get back into eating real food again, right? And so anti-inflammatory, when people are like, what's an anti-inflammatory diet? I'm just like eating real food, right? Like eating things really from the earth, just right. And so eating more cruciferous veggies, like the broccolis and the cauliflowers, the garlics and the onions, eating more dark pigment rich stuff, the berries and the cherries and the bell peppers and the beets and citrus and things high in the omega 3s, like the really oily and fatty fish. And if you're like not like we do a lot of tin fish, or salmon like weekly, but if you're not into fish, like a daily fish oil can be really helpful. Also nuts and seeds have omega 3s as well. Um, avocados, bone broth. And then if we're purchasing meat and eggs, making sure it's pasture raised or organic and without growth hormones, right? Because if we're working on hormone health and they're feeding animals lots of growth hormone, so they obviously grow bigger and they can get more meat, right? But then you're bringing in hormones into your body that's going to cause an imbalance, right? So opting just for like the pasture raised, the organic meat choices. And sometimes that means like eating a little bit less meat, but higher quality is kind of the trade-off that we make. Um, Aiming for 30 to different fruits and veggies each week, which initially can feel like a lot. But for me, I like if you can do it in a smoothie, if you can make it like granola with a handful of nuts and seeds, if you can do hashes and omelets and quiches and stews and soups and broths, right? With like broths made with 5 or 6 different veggies, whatever you kind of have left over, like cooked down in there. Because when you're eating this wide variety of fruits and vegetables, when you're getting all of these colors, you're also getting all of the vitamins and the minerals and the polyphenols that they all uniquely have, right? So instead of like hyper focusing on like, oh, I'm low in vitamin C or like supplementing, right, with like vitamin C or whatever, if we just eat the whole rainbow, we're going to get all of those vitamins and minerals that our body needs. So things not to eat or things to try to avoid as much as possible when healing hormone health. Eliminating the artificial sugars. We've obviously seen like lots of science that has said how inflammatory this is, and swapping for things like honey or maple syrup. Instead, no seed oils because the process is like they have to like bleach and like strip seeds and to make it a seed oil. So just opting for things um, like a cold pressed olive oil, avocado, coconut oils, avoiding those white breads and refined carbs, things that are all stripped of their nutrients, right? Like they love to like strip everything from their nutrients and then like sell us a supplement on the other side. And I'm like, wow, y'all are so great at marketing. It's crazy. Um, Eliminating those like sweetened beverages and sodas and sports drinks because, you know, we're like told that it's like healthy, like get your electrolytes and you like flip over like a Gatorade bottle and it's like sugar and dye and like things that we don't want in our body. Eliminating fake ingredients when possible. And then I like to say, like, when in doubt, just like decreasing barcodes, boxes, and bags as much as possible. Like I said, we obviously bring things in that, like, I'm like, I'm not making homemade pasta. Um, but if I do bring it in, like, is it just a really simple ingredients list, something that I could make if I wanted to? Um, Also like to say, just don't be scared of healthy fats. Cholesterol is the building block for all of our sex hormones. You can kind of see here, it starts with cholesterol and then it branches off into progesterone and estrogen and testosterone, right? Like we need all of these hormones. So conventional medicine would like to tell you to get your cholesterol as low as possible. But what we see in functional medicine is when women come in with like infertility or hormone imbalance and their cholesterol is like 100, um, because they can't build out the hormones that they need, right? So obviously, like, right, like we don't want to be in the 300s and have really high cholesterol, um, but just having a healthy amount and not being scared of fats, right? And getting those fats from pastured and organic meats, organ meats. We do ancestral blends sometimes and do like tacos with it and can't even really taste it, but you could always do like an organ supplement, egg yolks, shellfish, butter, ghee, and high quality fish or cod liver oil. And then just a note on not eating enough or under eating for hormone health, right? Like a really common side effect that we see with under eating is amenorrhea, meaning no periods. So like if there's something going on with the cycle, if the cycle's wonky, that means something's going on with the hormones, right? And typically people are coming in and feeling pretty crappy. Um, but why? Because there isn't enough of the raw materials. We don't have enough of those building blocks to produce hormones. Also, when we're not eating enough and don't have enough of those building blocks, the body sees that, or the brain sees that as a stressor, right? Like we don't have enough fuel. And so it's like going into really like survival mode. And so, like, shut it down. Like, first of all, we're not bringing a baby in because we don't have enough nutrients for ourselves, but also, like, we don't even have enough to build out like the non-essential hormones at this point. And so, I like to say, like, we can throw supplements at this all day long. You can take a car and make it fancy and gussy it up, and we can do all those things. But if there's no fuel, the car isn't going to run, right? And that's the same with our bodies. This is also something, like I said, that I wish I would have known, like in my early 20s, because I was like really exercising heavy and I was like trying to not eat as much because I was trying to lose weight after having a baby. But then I stopped having my periods, and to me, it didn't really seem like a problem. I was like, cool, like no periods, like it's dope. But if I would have known, but I also was feeling like crap, right? Like I was like tanked out, low energy, lots of depressive stuff going on. Um, and so if I would have known like, oh, like no periods and hormone stuff, and I'm not feeling myself, like if I would have known and could have put that all together, it's been really helpful. That would have saved me some years, but here we are. So we live in a society where thin is healthy. And as women, we're taught kind of like the thinner, the better, right? And I would just say this isn't true, right? Like, one, from a physical perspective, it's not great for our health. Two, historically, like having a little bit of like extra body weight kind of meant that you were safe enough, right? But three, like we need to have healthy hormones. We need to feel good. And like, I just don't like that the social media and the TikTok and the magazines, it's all like thin, thin, thin. And like, you know, girls as young as 5 are hearing these messages, and that's so detrimental to our brains, right? So we need to like reframe that healthy isn't thin, but healthy is like, do I feel strong? Do I have bounce hormones? Do I have good energy, right? Do I have a healthy brain that can function, right? That to me is health, not a number on the scale. So guidelines for a balanced plate for hormones, right? So a palm full of protein with every meal, a variety of good fruits and veggies, a dollop of healthy fats like we talked about, nuts, seeds, and then like a base of like some rice or sweet potatoes or some grains. And then when balancing hormone health, no skipping meals, right? This can trigger a blood sugar spike. When we skip meals and we're not getting fuel, the brain's like, oh, like where's my next meal at, right? Like that's really destabilizing for the brain. And so trying to eat like every 4-ish hours so our energy doesn't crash and get hangry. Um, no fasting when balancing hormones, and no naked carbs, right? Like carbs are great. Carbs are energy. We can see some hormone imbalance when women go really low carb as well. But I would say, like I said, carbs get broken down into cellular energy. We want carbs, but we also want to pair it with some like protein or some fat so it doesn't have this big blood sugar spike as well. So you can go on Pinterest, you can make this really fun. If you type in like hormone health meals on Pinterest, you'll get a lot of like really great options and bowls and stuff that you can put together. And just kind of using this, I'm not going to go over this whole thing, but like you could take a screenshot of this, and you could like, from the first line, like, okay, like I'm going to take some protein, and then I'm going to go down and add like a couple of these veggies from the rainbow veggies list, and then I'm going to go down and add like a a starch in there. I'm going to add like, make sure I get my fruits in, right? And just kind of like building a plate that way. That can be a really fun thing to do. I like to do a lot of bowl stuff, Asian style bowls, salmon bowls, right? We do a lot of like stews and stuff as well. You can look at like crock pot meals and you just like throw it all in there and walk away for 6 hours. Um, and that can be great. And then don't skip on the herbs and spices, right? Like that's also its own vitamins and minerals and healing qualities and herbs and spices as well. So just a recap for this section, picking the right foods for your hormones, right? So inflammatory foods are things that have been processed, genetically modified, scientifically engineered, not from nature, not recognized by the body, causing inflammation. Inflammation can break down tissue and mess up hormone signaling. Anti-inflammatory foods are real foods in their whole form, and they're recognized by the body because they're from nature, as are we. Our body uses these appropriately to build up hormones. I want to just add into like right when people are like, okay, what's the right diet for balancing my hormones? And I'm like I said, just eating real foods, right? But people are like, is it vegan? Is it vegetarian? Is it being a carnivore? I think that depending on your genetics and where you came from, some things just resonate better with your body than other things do, right? Like some people do really well with red meat, or other people do really well with fish. And I think part of that is just, like I said, where we're ancestrally from. Also, I would just say as long as you're eating real foods. So also in my 20s, I was vegan because it's healthier, quote unquote. But I was eating a lot of like fake foods, like the Impossible Burgers and like the fake meats, that had way more ingredient stuff on there, way more fake things than just eating like a high quality burger, right? Or high quality meat, I should say. So I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. It's how it feels in your body. How is your energy? What is like, how are you feeling? Can you get up and go? How is your clarity of mind? That's the right diet for you, right? Like that's the right food for you. Um, Under eating and not eating enough healthy fats can both lead to hormone imbalance, and then aim for protein with every meal, a variety of fruits and veggies every week, no skipping meals, and then when in doubt, ask, do I recognize this food or this ingredient? So this can be also a fun little journal thing to do. Like if you want to like pause or come back to this. I love journaling. It's a really great way. I think when you get like writing pen on paper, it starts to get like the juices flowing and you can really start to see where you may like need to grow in some things, right? So what's your relationship like with food? Do you enjoy cooking, or do you enjoy a variety of different foods, or do you just eat to fill your belly with whatever's in the pantry, right? And this isn't like a judgment. This is just being really curious. Um, when you're like, okay, like I really want to fix my hormone health, like we have to start somewhere and get curious about our lifestyle, right? What inflammatory things can I decrease? What anti-inflammatory or real foods can I add into rotation? Do I eat 3 meals a day, or do I skip meals, right? Especially as women, we're like, feed the kids, feed everybody else, not ourselves. No. Can't pour from an empty cup, right? So if your boss is like, you want to like work through lunch? No. I'm going outside and get my feet on the grass. I'm going to nourish myself. um, what is one meal I can start with just for the month? So if you're like, I don't cook anything, pick one thing. Maybe it's just like breakfast, and you're like, I'm just going to like really make sure I can do breakfast for the month, right? And I'm going to try to aim for these goals and building a plate. And then ask yourself, what would the proper fuel and energy do for your hormones? So, things that can muck up our hormone signaling and how to clear it up. So, in our society, right, like I would just say that we live in a modern world where we're exposed to a lot of what's called xenoestrogens, right? Xeno mean foreign, or endocrine disruptors that can dock on our hormone receptor sites like lock and key, and either change the signaling or enhance the signaling or shut down the signaling, whatever it is. It's just like not with the proper signaling that our hormones should have been doing, right? And so it says there's a statistic that said there's about 85,000 chemicals in commerce, with about 2,500 new ones coming out each year. Um, and then some people say like it's only 500. 500 doesn't matter. There's a lot of chemicals in commerce that aren't natural to our body, right? And so these can be things like detergents and fabric softeners and plastics and perfumes and fragrances and fumes from like new carpet or Scotchgard or flame retardant, right? Like baby clothes with flame retardants in it, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, right? And so it's no wonder that when we have started to make things that are like long lasting and make things more convenient and all these like cups to go and carry out containers and these really heavily fragranced fabric softeners and stuff like that, that like we're also seeing a really vast change in women's hormone health, right? And a lot of women who struggled with infertility, right? Like they started to cut these things out and like go more natural and then like were able to get pregnant, right? And so like for me, like if I'm going out, like if we're going to get coffee, like I always try to opt and like bring my own cup with me because when plastic gets heated up, then plastic will like leach its chemicals into whatever you're eating. And like it's like, okay, things are BPA free now. Okay. So instead they just use like BPB or BPS, right? Like they're just swapping the chemical structure. And so like as much as possible, like um like switching to glass or stainless steel, ditching the synthetic fragrances that can like really muck up our hormone signaling. Where budget allows, purchasing organic or things without pesticides, right? Um, Using safe beauty products or skincare products because our skin is such a great absorber, which is why in conventional medicine we use medication patches for like pain medication because it absorbs into the skin. It doesn't have to do what's called like the first pass effect. It doesn't have to like get broken down. So all of that stuff that we're like touching, whether it's like the Clorox wipes or, the cleaners that like make our house smell like roses or whatever, or all the stuff that we're lathering all over our skin, that's all getting absorbed into our skin, gets absorbed into the bloodstream, can really muck up our hormone signaling. And I don't know if the statistic was like women use 20 something products a day on their skin. I mean, I know that I used to use a lot more stuff on my skin, but now I just use like olive oil, and that's about it. Um, but like I think like we feel like to present ourselves to society, like we have to be like forever fresh and clean, right? So it's like put all the makeup on, put all the moisturizers on, put all the smelly things, right? Like the scented pads and like what, all of this stuff. Because that's how we need feel like we have to like present ourselves as being like pure, like whatever bullshit that is. I don't pardon my French, but this is really having an effect on our bodies, right? And so getting back to those more natural products, right? Like we use vinegar to clean our home. Um, no, it's like not as like white as the Clorox bleach stuff is, but I also feel way safer using that and like using things that I feel safer, like just for the earth itself, right? When we're like cleaning with all that stuff and we're like dumping it down our drains and then it's getting in our waterways, right? Like we don't want that stuff in our earth, right? We don't want that stuff in our body. So our homes and the world just used to be non-tox. We didn't have to call it that, but now we live in a convenient world with like instant food and things packaged in plastic and chemical solvents for long-lasting effects. And that stuff just doesn't come without a cost. And so I really like the EWG website because you can go on there and they give you kind of like their top 10 body cleaners, right? That like have been like ranked safe, or you can put your stuff in and see how it stands up. And so like, let's just say that we have all of these things in our system, these excess estrogens, these excess xenoestrogens, these excess endocrine disruptors or toxins. How do we get them out of the body, right? And so we have three main detox pathways. We have our skin, our kidneys that filter and pee things out, and then our main detox organ is our liver, right? And what our liver does, it sits on the right side of the body, right under the rib cage, and it will package up toxins and these xenoestrogens, right? It packages them up and it dumps them into the gallbladder, which is this like little green piece you can see here. If you don't have a gallbladder, it just drops it right into the cystic duct. And then that will drop into the small intestine so it can all get pooped out, right? Small intestine down to the large intestine to the rectum and out into the toilet, right? And so in Chinese medicine, the liver is often like seen as like the general and it like regulates chi and life force energy, right? And so like a bogged down, a sluggish liver is like a sluggish life, a bogged down life, right? And I like to think of if you've ever been hiking and you've seen this like pristine river that's like running and it's clear and it's beautiful, right? It's like flowing freely. And then you get to a part where it gets dammed up, right? And then you kind of look right before that dammed spot and it's like kind of like algae starts to bloom or just looks kind of funky, right? It's kind of the same in our body if we're not getting that good flow, if the liver isn't functioning well, if the liver isn't packaging those things up and like really getting that nice flow. So all of those extra hormones, extra toxins that are building up in our body can be making the hormones wonky. And so a couple of things, we want to get the toxins out, right? So like I said, the liver packages it, puts it in the small intestine, we poop it out. So we have to make sure we're pooping every day. Um, so important for overall health. And poop is like free information, right? And it's like we're looking for like type 3, type 4, like an easy bowel movement, right? They say that you should be able to poop as fast as you pee in the morning, right? So if we're really constipated, or if we're not pooping every day, or we're not getting enough fiber, is there something going on with the gut? This is when we can look at functional medicine and do like GI mapping and seeing if there's something like toxins or like overgrown bacteria in the gut. Um, if it's really, really liquidy, right, like diarrhea, is it like, okay, like the body wasn't tolerating something? What's going on there, right? Irregardless, we want to make sure that we're pooping every day to get those extra toxins out because if it's just sitting in the intestines, then it's going to get reabsorbed back into the body. And so consider adding in fiber slowly, like in a fiber powder. I mean, obviously, I would say food is medicine approach first, right? So eating more fruits and more veggies with the skin on to get that natural fiber, but you can also do a fiber powder and then, of course, drinking water. And then what are things that we can do to support the liver? So reducing toxin exposure, right? So those xenoestrogens, because we don't want the liver to have to work harder than it needs to, right? If it's having to clear out a lot, if it's having to clear out a lot of medications, toxins, and xenoestrogens, right? Alcohol, it's going to be bogged down. So we want to limit the exposure where we can. Um, we want to nourish the liver. The liver needs nutrients, it needs building blocks to work, right? It needs vitamins and minerals to do its job. And so the liver loves things like brassicas, like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, all those sulfur-rich veggies. Things that are bitter, so like dark chocolate, coffee without cream, arugula, endives, radishes, anything that kind of makes like the mouth like salivate a little bit. Really great for digestive health. Sweating daily to help remove toxins, increasing water, liver herbs can be supportive, pooping daily, and then avoiding alcohol, right? Alcohol is a toxin. The liver has to detox it. Um, we just live in a world where it's like wine down Wednesday and mimosa Saturday. And, like anybody's known me for a while, I used to drink probably half a beverage a day, right? Didn't put that on my intake form with the doctor, but I probably did, right? But it's because it's so common, right? It's like, oh, we need it to wind down. And like, if you go out to dinner, you're almost, and you're like, no, I'm not drinking. Everyone's like, oh, what? You're being lame. And you're like, you just be like, I'm working on my hormone health, right? I'm trying to like really be kind to my liver. So herbs for liver support, milk thistle, burdock, dandelion root, licorice root. I make a dandy digestive bitters that I have online that you could purchase, but I just take these and drop them. I think it has all four of those in there. You just take it and you drop it on the tongue like 15 minutes before a meal, and that can really help digestive health. And those herbs also support the liver. You can also do turmeric and ginger, really good for your liver support. You can find any of these in a tea form. I put milk thistle in my daily tea with that licorice and ashwagandha. You could do a liver health capsule. So like lots of options. It's just what's your vibe, right? So I would say supporting the liver and incorporating good nutrition is medicine for almost any ailment, especially hormones, but really anything. And I know a lot of herbalists, when I go to conferences, will put liver herbs or a liver herb in almost any blend that they're making for somebody, right? So like somebody might come to them with a complaint of cardiac stuff or respiratory, like whatever it is, but they're always putting like a liver herb as a driver in there just to really support the balance of the body and support this organ. So just a recap on this section, hormone health can be caused, or hormone issues can be caused by xenoestrogen endocrine disruptors, inflammation that mucks up the signaling. Imbalanced estrogen can lead to cyclical migraines, heavy bleeding, PCOS, worsening endo, fatigue, mood swings, PMS, right? That really high estrogen, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. We can remove excess xenoestrogen or endocrine disrupting chemicals and toxins, fragrances, dyes, pesticides. This will help our hormone health and get the body back into balance. This does not mean that you have to go to your home and toss everything. I feel like when people hear this for the first time, I felt this way. I'm like, oh my God, everything in my house is toxic. But just the next time you go to the store, right? Maybe bringing in fragrance free, going on that EWG website and then just like picking, going through their top 10 lists and picking, like I'm going to swap to this laundry detergent or that dishwasher, like soap, something like that, right? But it doesn't mean that we need to go around and toss everything in our home because we do just live in modern society, right? We have a liver for a reason. Our body detoxes for a reason. We just don't want to bring in extra stuff. A healthy liver equals healthy hormone balance. The liver removes what we don't need and gets that just right Goldilocks effect for our hormones, right? So, eating liver-loving foods, sweating daily, drink water, poop regularly, limit alcohol when healing hormones. So what is one thing you could do to help your detox pathways? What is one thing you could implement to have less toxins in your life? Are there any foods or herbs that you could include in the kitchen to support detox, to support your hormones? Hormones. Is there any bowel health work? How is your poop routine? And what is your relationship like with alcohol, right? Once again, this is not judgment by any stretch of the imagination. I was up dancing on top of the tables at the bars, but I had a trainer one time kind of give me because I was like, oh, I need alcohol to unwind. And she's like, if you need that, you have a problem. And it was really shitty the way she said it. I wish she would have said it in a kinder way. And it's like, she's no fun. She don't know nothing, whatever. Bye. But as I've like done like inner work therapy or I've just like looked at my relationship with alcohol, right? It's like, okay, if we need a cocktail to unwind, if we need a cocktail to take the edge off, if I need a glass of wine to be able to be in a group with those people, like maybe that's just not the group for me, right? If I need a beverage to unwind for my day, like why was my day that wound up that I need something to bring me down? Does that make sense? So like I said, this like isn't a judgment. It's just really being curious in support of feeling better, getting your vibrancy back, and balancing hormones. It's also lots of fun mocktails and stuff that you can make. And if, like if you get on Pinterest, there's lots of fun mocktail recipes. So I should also just say, right, like I'm gonna backtrack, like having a glass of wine from time to time with friends to celebrate, that's great. I'm just saying like in excess every day, right? Moving on. Which hormones are we referring to, right? When people are typically saying, my hormones are imbalanced, my hormones are so wonky, right? Which ones are we really talking about? Because we have lots of hormones in our body. We have like thyroid hormones, we have stress hormones like the cortisol and epinephrine. But specifically, we're talking about in this class, female sex hormones that people are typically referencing when they're talking about hormone imbalance. So what do these do in your body throughout the month? And then how are we going to use the cycle as free information to see if your hormones are in balance, right? Because those hormones regulate the cycle, they go hand in hand. So obviously, if the cycle is off, then there's something off with the hormones. So progesterone, progestation, needed to keep and hold a pregnancy. It's kind of like our feel-good hormones, support sleep, helps synthesize the neurotransmitter GABA, which is also like a feel-good, right? Buffers the effects of estrogen. Estrogen is our building hormone, so it builds the uterine lining every month. Builds breast tissues during puberty. It's also right linked to like estrogenic cancers, right? Because it's like very building as well. But estrogen is not just for reproductive health. We have estrogen receptors, right? We say like the hormones travel with the blood, they dock on the receptor. We have these receptors on the bones and the heart and brain and muscles, and right? And so it supports like libido and mood and cardiovascular health and vaginal suppleness and memory depend on estrogen, which is why we can see when women go through menopause and estrogen really drops off, the ovaries go offline, that women in menopause may have struggles with mood or vaginal dryness or memory, right? or women who get a hysterectomy and go through like an early or like a early menopause, right? Testosterone, right? Like not just a male hormone, also in females, just to a lesser degree, but this can be supportive of like verve and vigor. It supports libido, mood, muscle tissue. And when this is imbalanced, it can result in acne, hair loss, low libido, facial hair, and irregular menstruation. So, like I said, sometimes we're like, the hormones are like, my hormones are wacky, they're crazy. And hormones aren't bad, they just need to be in balance. We're looking for that Goldilocks effect, right? Not too much, not too little, but just right. And also, like, let's say you already went through menopause or you've had a hysterectomy, um, and you're like, I can't, right? Because we're going to be talking about the cycle. If you're like, well, I can't use the cycle to track, like some people will use like the moon to track, right? Just to like get curious, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but also you can do all of these things that we talked about that are supportive, right? So like supporting the brain health, supporting sleep, good deep nutrition, right? Opening up those detox pathways, supporting the liver, all of those things are going to be really beneficial for your health and balancing the hormones, right? Just because your ovaries are offline, the adrenals kick in and the adrenals will kind of pick up the slack. So you can still do all of those things without using the cycle. But for those who are still having a monthly cycle, right? Like what's happening every month in your body. And so obviously the purpose of our cycle is kind of the chance, giving our body the chance to conceive life. So even if you're not trying to get pregnant, our cycle can be seen as our monthly report card or almost similar to like a vital sign. So like the same if you went to your doctor and your blood pressure was sky high, something's off. If there's something going on with your cycle, if it's irregular or wonky, then something's off, something's going on with your hormones. And so we can kind of see here, like we menstruate, right? And then we go through this follicular phase. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. We ovulate around day 14. This is when we can get pregnant. And then the egg pops out. We have what's left over called the corpus luteum, which makes progesterone, our feel-good hormone, trying to hold a pregnancy if we did get pregnant when we ovulated. And if no pregnancy occurs, then everything sheds and we start over again. So understanding your hormones or your cycle to understand your hormones, right? So like I said, where does it start? It's all starting in the brain. The brain is sending that first messenger from the pituitary. And that messenger is going down to the ovaries and telling the ovaries to go ahead and mature a follicle. So, right, this is days like 7 to 14-ish, right? Like go ahead right here, you can see like it starts to mature that follicle. And as this follicle is maturing, that maturation process is releasing estrogen to start to build up the lining of the uterus that you can kind of see over here. Because the uterus is trying to become this like nice cozy nesting place if pregnancy were to occur, right? So estrogen's being released at this point, the follicle's maturing. The egg pops out around day 14, that's ovulation, right? Goes down the fallopian tube and tries to implant into the uterus, right? During this time, our hormones are at their highest point. And then comes the luteal phase. So we see here we have this like leftover follicle, which becomes the corpus luteum, which is so cool that the body makes a temporary organ, right? So this will release progesterone until the placenta kicks online around like 12-ish weeks. But progesterone is needed to hold a pregnancy. It also will make the cervix make thicker discharge. So like nothing can get up into the cervix if a pregnancy were to occur, right? It's like this safety mechanism. It's like make it thicker so no bacteria can get up here. And then if no pregnancy occurs, then days 1 through 7, right? This whole lining sheds and we start again, right? And so why does this matter? Because we can use this information if we're having things like really, really heavy cycles, let's say, right? Let's say you're bleeding a lot, you're changing tampons every hour or two, you're having like really thick clotting. This can tell us, right? Like, okay, we know estrogen's a building hormone. It must have built up like a lot of uterine lining, right? That's why we're shedding so much. So like, why is there so much estrogen? We really need to work on detox. We really need to make sure we're not getting those xenoestrogens into our body, right? Let's say that like you're not ovulating, or let's say that right, like no ovulation occurred, like Was there a signal, a message from the brain that didn't come online? We can see this a lot in PCOS. Or if you're not getting that good like progesterone feeling in this later half of your period, did we not ovulate and we're not getting that progesterone, right? Or is the estrogen so high that it's not the progesterone can't counteract it, right? Also, if estrogen's really, really high, when we go and menstruate and it drops off, that can lead to those like really vast PMS symptoms, right? It's not this like kind of like gentle drop. If we're going from this like really estrogenic phase down, this can feel really kind of like shocking to the body. So why this matters is because when we start to like notice our cycle health, notice what's normal, then we can discern where things are kind of off. So what does normal look like, right? So consistently every 24 to 32 days would be having a cycle. A cycle 3 to 7 days in length, about 3 tablespoons of blood, so about 10 regular sized pads or tampons in total. And then ovulation about 14 days after your first day of bleeding. And then things that are normal would be like mild cramping and fatigue and like some increased hunger due to progesterone. So these are things that are normal, but it's about what's normal to you, right? So like as long as it feels cyclical to you, like this is like, you're like minor 3 days, they come every 29 days, and you're kind of seeing your pattern. Then if something goes off, maybe something gets off the first for a month, and you're like, okay, well, I was like sick like this month, or removed, or something big happened. So your cycle kind of shifts. But let's say that like 3, 4, 5 months and everything's off. Now we need to be looking deeper. Is there something going on with the hormones? Is there something going on with the brain signaling? Is it we're not getting enough nutrients? Is it that we're having too many toxins in the body, right? Like this is where we can really get into like using those foundational steps that we talked about, or also working with functional medicine to like look at some labs. We can look at hormone labs. We can look at mapping out the cycle and seeing what's going on. So I love this graphic. When somebody says you're hormonal, right? Like I'm like, oh yes, I am hormonal because I'm a woman and we're designed to be, right? So if we look at this, look at all these up in this every day our hormones change, right? For women. So if you start from the beginning, like this is the menstrual phase, and look at how low estrogen and progesterone are. And we talked about how those can kind of like be beneficial for mood and for sleep, and they're so low, right? So no wonder women at this time, like I don't have the space, right? I don't have the bandwidth, right? We're not really designed to. And then we look in the follicular phase. So the follicle is developing. It's starting to release estrogen because of the follicle developing. So we see estrogen start to climb up. So like we're feeling like a little bit of like, okay, all right. Then we get into the ovulation phase and everything's at its highest, right? The corpus luteum kicks on. We start to release progesterone. You can see this like blue line that comes through. So this is like our feel-good hormone in the second half. And if we don't get pregnant, then we can see everything just drops down like a roller coaster, right? So yes, women are cyclical. Yes, we're hormonal, but like because we change every day, we are designed to. And if as women, we expect to be like men, right? Because men don't do this. Men's hormones are like the same every day. If we expect to perform like a man, or expect ourselves to be the same every day. We're gonna either burn out or feel like something's wrong with us, right? So we need to try to work with our hormones, honor our biology, honor that divine feminine energy that we have, right? Honor this ebb and flow and whatever that lesson's trying to teach us, and work with our hormones and not against them. So, using nature to understand our cycles, we know that nature is cyclical, just like the moon goes through a phase every 29 days. Our average period is 28 days. Dope. Um, Seasons change throughout the year, right? They go in a cycle, they're cyclical as well. So, like, if nature's cycles just stopped, if we were in winter for a year, people would be like, WTF, right? Um, what's going on here? And so we need to give that same attention to our body, right? If our cycles just stop or something is off, then we need to start to put our detective hats on and be like, what's going on here, right? And so if you're like in that winter time, let's say like menstruation, right? And like your energy is low, okay, well, it's low because I'm in my menstrual phase. But if it's low for months and months and months to the point that we're like, I can't really function, then something is off, right? And that's when we need to like either look into lab work or do the stuff that we were talking about earlier. Focus on the brain, focus on nutrition, focus on sleep, right? And get back to those basics so we can reset the body and get it back in rhythm. Using the cycles to your advantage. So I really like to, like I said, I really love to journal and I really like to use my cycles. And this is where I said, like, if you're not ovulating, sorry, if you're not menstruating, if you're maybe in menopause, but you're still like loving those journaly vibes, you can use the moon and journal with the moon. I feel like that's kind of the same energy and I really like that. But starting with the follicular phase, right? This like, if you look over here, it's like that growing phase, growing the follicle, the estrogen slowly increasing, right? So we're getting some energy back. This is like that springtime energy, opening up the windows. We're like, oh, we've got plans. We're planting the seeds. We're planning new goals, new beginnings. This is when I'm like, okay, like, what do I want to do this month, right? As my energy's starting to climb. Then we get into the ovulatory phase, which is like full moon energy. We can see when we ovulate, our hormones are all at their highest. We're feeling magnetic. Our communication's really strong. This is like the time, like take the interview, do the thing. High energy time, right? High sexual energy because this is a time where you could get pregnant. So this is a time that like maybe you're having like a lot of sex dreams or like maybe you're like more into your spouse at this time, right? Like biologically for a reason. Um, the luteal phase is when the progesterone's released, right? That's like our feel-good hormone, our good sleep hormone, kind of like that nesting energy. So this is like fall time, harvesting, slowing things down, finishing any projects that we like may have started in the follicular phase, and finishing up any details, right? This can be like that, like cozy down, hunker down time. And then coming into our menstrual phase, right? We see all of our hormones go way down. So looking within, going deeper, having more solitude, more alone time, like maybe not going out with friends at this time or like doing really strenuous things. Maybe instead of doing exercise, you do like a gentle yoga at this period instead, right? Taking just like a little walk instead. Not doing like the big party, like whatever it is at this time, right? Like going into your intuition, getting clear, taking time for yourself, course correcting. That way, when we come into our follicular phase, we're like, okay, like we're shedding, literally physically shedding, but then we can also energetically be shedding what doesn't serve us. So, are you cyclical, right? How in tune are you with your cycles? If you're already in sync, keep it up. But if not, just like really time to get curious because this is the key to our hormone health. This is like a free little like access piece that we can use to see how our hormones are doing. So, sorry, there's a fly buzzing. Are your cycles regular or irregular? How long are they? Do you notice energy shifts throughout the month? Do you notice food cravings? Do you have any cyclical symptoms, right? So when we talked about that, like if your estrogen's really high and it's crashing down, that's when people can kind of have those like hormonal migraines, PMS, flare-ups, because menstruation can be an inflammatory phase. But if we're having like imbalanced estrogen and progesterone, then we can really feel it, right? And that's when we're going to be like working on clearing out some of those extra estrogens. Acne, any of these. When in your cycle are these showing up? And then are there any action steps that you want to take, right? So like honoring yourself during menstruation, not planning stuff. Like I don't plan client meetings and I don't plan to do workshops just because I know that my energy is like going to be a little bit lower, right? And maybe if you're like, okay, I don't have that option. I work like a 9 to 5 and I can't take off the week. Totally understand, but are there things that you can implement and put in place to support yourself more, right? So it's like, can you already have a couple of meals made? Can you have some bone broths made in the freezer, things that you can easily pop out and like just kind of have ready? Like maybe you just do like baths during this time. If you have a partner, like, hey, like these days, like I just kind of need to be by myself and keeping it low key, right? And then like maybe honing in on your energy when it's highest. And like I said, when you know your regular fluctuations, you can plan accordingly and then just give yourself grace for being an ebb and flow human being, right? For not being a robot because we're not designed to be. And then things like what does abnormal look like, right? So inconsistent. So maybe one day or 1 month your cycle's 20 days, and the next month it comes 40 days later. That would be inconsistent, right? skipped periods, um, periods that are shorter than 2 days, longer than 8, soaking through tampons every 2 hours, right? No ovulation, deep fatigue or pain that keeps you from school or work. Like I said, like a little bit of like cramping and fatigue is normal, but not to the point where like we can't function. That's not normal. And I think in our society, we like have deemed it kind of normal. Like she's just on her period, she's PMSing, whatever that is. Like we should still be able to function, right? And we shouldn't have to pop a bunch of ibuprofen to get through the day or a bunch of Midol. Um, Something deeper is going on, right? An estrogen imbalance could be things like facial hair, thinning hair, low libido, mood imbalance, infertility, heavy cramping not relieved with ibuprofen, hormonal migraines, right? Like things like this, like I said, aren't normal. And like I said, when I used to work in the emergency room, when like young girls would come in with symptoms like this, we're just not taught women's health and medical worlds for some reason, right? It's like maybe a quick 2 week course, but then like girls would be coming in and be like, I can't go to school. I'm taking my all around the clock. Having like golf ball sized clots, and they're like, oh yeah, welcome to being a woman. It's like, no, that's not normal. Maybe because a lot of people are having these experiences, but that's not what normal is. We need to get to the root issue and address what's going on. And that is what we can do. I mean, one, for our physical body, but two, it's going to make us feel so good, right? When we address those things, we're going to have more energy. We're going to feel lit up. We're going to feel like we have ease of those symptoms. That feels so much better and safer, right? Um, Sorry if I just hit the microphone. Um, but things that we can do, right? Do all those action steps. And then if we need to, this is when working, what I do in like my one-on-one practice, we can, if we need to, look at lab work. We can look at your estrogen. We can look at your progesterone. We can do things like a Dutch test. We can look and see what these levels look like and then make, make recommendations from there, what we need to do with your body. So this is just a little bit of like herbal support for your period. These are really great like symptom relief, but we don't want to just take these without addressing the root cause, right? So we can take these and it'll help with cramping and things like that, but we don't want to just band-aid the solutions, right? Like what can we do to get to the root so we don't have such excessive cramping, right? So really excessive bleeding, things like hemostatic herbs that can kind of like tighten and tone the uterus can be things like red raspberry leaf or yarrow or rose in tea form. For balancing female sex hormones, Vitex is really incredible. It's kind of like the female herb, I would say. Um, Works on the brain piece to kind of like get that conductor, that balance back into place, gets that signaling back onto track. You take this daily in the morning, and your cycles will typically change, or they can change if you start to take this as it's like re-regulating. It can also help increase progesterone as well. And then things for cramps would be like motherwort. That's the one that I talked about with anxiety to avoid in hypothyroid and cardiac history, but it can really help with cramping. And then obviously cramp bark is an incredible herb. And then, like I said, menstruation can be inflammatory. So adding in lots of anti-inflammatory foods, things like ginger and turmeric can be really helpful. I love to make like ginger tea when I'm on my period. I really don't get cramps, but if I'm just feeling like a little twingy, ginger can be really helpful. I'll just like grate some into hot water and then sip on that. And then cod liver oil can be good for inflammation, and then also just like a heat pack and castor oil. But like I said, we don't want to just band-aid the symptoms. We want to address them, get to the root so we're not having them anymore, right? Or easing them. And then I just like this, I think this is one of the last slides, but I really like this graphic of just like a heads up to what's coming, right? So I think when we know what our cycles is, when we know what's coming, it makes us feel more prepared. I just know for me personally, right? Like when I was a girl, like I didn't know really anything about my cycle. They do like fourth grade education and like everybody's like freaking out, like, oh my God, we're gonna bleed and die, right? Like my daughter came home and said the same thing. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to hurt. Your hormones can be balanced, right? Um, so it's nice to know like how our bodies work. I think we should have more information on that, but then also what's coming up for us. I just found this stuff out like 2 years ago, right? So as far as like the perimenopause and postmenopause, I'm like, oh, that's good to know. So premenopause, right? This is like our cycles every month should be like up and down, nice and flowy, really regular, doing the thing expected, right? And then we get into perimenopause, which is like mid 40s, 50s. And then cycles kind of get like wonky. Like the ovaries are starting to go offline at this point. And so we can see like a shift in the hormones, like kind of this unpredictability. But knowing if we are taking really great care of ourselves in pre-menopause, it can support perimenopause, right? So if we have good hormone health going into it, it can like kind of ease this transition. And then I love to see in postmenopause that like, okay, the ovaries go offline. We make a little bit of estrogen still in the adrenal glands, but ovaries are offline, right? So we're kind of like losing that like mood, that good mood hormone and the sleep hormone and like losing that like estrogen helps with like vaginal suppleness, like I talked about. So like women will say in postmenopause, dealing with I don't want to call it a dry vagina, but I can't think of any other words. But just not having that like lubrication, right? So knowing that if we support ourselves in premenopause, this can be really helpful for postmenopause as well, right? Um, I heard an herbalist and she was talking about postmenopause and she's like, it's like going through the ring of fire, but also on the other side, she's like, I think this is a really, first of all, we don't respect it enough in our culture, but it can be a really beautiful time as women because we're not doing this ebb and flow anymore. We've like shed that. And now we're on this like even keeled level of just like refining, getting wise, making our wisdom potent so we can pass it down to the next generation. And I really, really love that. But things maybe to be expected in postmenopause are just like some sleep changes, some vaginal health changes, a little bit of mood, but like how do you support yourself in that time, right? Like building out the space to really support yourself. So, from this workshop, what do we now know, right? Like where can you go? So you know where your hormone signaling starts in the brain, right? We know that stress can hijack it. We have a couple things that how can you support it, right? You know, foods that you need to balance your hormones and nourish yourselves and what to avoid. You know how endocrine disruptors and xenoestrogens can muck up your hormone signaling and then how to also clear them out, right? Supporting your liver. And then you also now know how to use your cycle as kind of like a monthly report card to see how your hormones are doing, right? So where do we go from here? Um, action steps. I said, I know this is a lot of information, right? I think information and knowledge is power, but I don't want it to feel overwhelming. So allow it to process, right? Take something that resonates and just leave the rest for another day. You can always come back to this. You can always fast forward to a section that you're like, okay, like now I'm ready to get into that. But I think, like I said, knowledge and knowing is power in itself. So take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Pin a fun, get on Pinterest, make it fun, look at some fun recipes, like build out the space for that to like not make it feel overwhelming, right? Maybe just picking one or two action steps. Like don't try to do everything at once. Take something that resonates and it's like, okay, I need a stress reduction technique. Maybe I'm going to make sure I put a scheduled yoga class on my calendar. I'm going to build out 1 hour on my calendar for me a week, something like that, right? Maybe I'm going to like bring in some herbal support. Next time I shop, I'm going to try to do fragrance free, whatever it is, right? Um, I always tell people if I'm like working with clients, take a week to prepare, right? Because you want to give yourself the time to journal like what this means to you. You want to envision what balanced hormones look like. Why does this feel important? Dream a little. Why did you show up for this class? Why did you show up for yourself? Like, what are you looking to gain from this? Because I think when we know, if we have a little dream, like, I want it to feel this way, this is how I want to feel, then we're more likely to stick with it rather than like, I just need to eat healthy and I need to sleep, right? Like that, I'm like, we've been told that our whole lives. And for some, like, we just don't do it, right? But if I have a dream, if I'm like, yeah, this is how I want to feel. I want to be able to have good energy and run around with my kids. I want to have good health. I want to have like a good mood, right? Set the intention and let that why be your motivation. Give yourself a week to like journal and paint and draw and dream that out, how that would feel. I don't know why I said paint. I don't like to paint, but maybe somebody in here does. And then just knowing we're all human and we fall off the horse, right? That's okay. I hear that a lot too. Like, um, I started something and I fell off the horse. I'm like, we all have 100 times. Healing is not a linear journey. It's a cycle and it's a circle, and we keep coming back around and around and around till finally, like, when you fall off, you're like, oh, now I know what to do, get back on. That's okay, right? showing up for this is like one step. That's enough, right? And if you do something for a couple weeks and you fall off and then you come back to it, like that's enough. We just keep coming back to it again and again and again. We keep remembering our why and we keep coming back to wanting that healing for ourselves, knowing it's possible, right? Also remembering hormones and stuff could have been in balance for 1, 2, or 10 years. So it's not going to be this overnight switch, right? It's going to maybe take a couple of months to notice shifts. And I would say that like one of the hardest things in our really fast culture is that we want like a lot of really immediate results. Like, what's the 30-day plan? What's the 20-day fix? What's the supplement? What's the pill? Right? Like I hear that a lot from people. And I'm like, it's kind of just a lifestyle change. It's getting back to that life that our bodies were meant to live with, right? Like getting back to that like natural rhythm, getting back to like, and I don't want to call it mundane because mundane feels boring, but it's like just slowing down a little bit, right? Like being more mindful with our food choices. Just going to sleep at a good time. And I notice some people are like, but I'm a party person. I like to go out and like do, and I'm like, I used to too, but I also felt like SHIT, right? Like I was so tired I couldn't get up and do things. So just like I don't know, I'm ranting now. Just knowing that it is just kind of more of a lifestyle change. But it's totally worth it. And it's really a healing journey and a healing process. So be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, knowing your body can come back into balance when we allow it. And another thing that you can do is just track your cycles and your moods while making these action steps to see what changes happen. So give yourself a giant nod of gratitude, a pat on the back for showing up for something different, for going through this, for like moving towards your healing journey, trying to have a healthier life, trying to have healthier hormones, right? Like this is the work and it's not always easy work. So like hats off to anybody who's doing it. It's incredible, right? And it's so worth it, but it is work. Um, and then for if anybody needs deeper, more individual support, this is where you can reach me on my website. It's the Gutsy Herbalist. And this is where I do a lot of like one-on-one consultation work. Like we can really get into the nitty-gritty. I'm gonna always recommend like start with the foundations first, right? Like start with the sleep, start with the food, start with the stress piece, right? Because you don't want to invest a lot of money in like lab work and supplements if we haven't even done the foundations, right? But sometimes it is nice to have somebody to hold you accountable, which is what I do in one-on-one work, right? Maybe you're like, this just feels really overwhelming and I need somebody to like build out a meal plan for me. I need like more help with recipe stuff. I need um instruction on where to go to get supplements, to get herbs, right? Like sometimes like that can feel really good to have somebody in your support team, and that's what I do. So if you're needing more one-on-one work, you can reach me at my website. And as always, like I just wish you the most blessed and beautiful healing journey. And so grateful y'all are here. So, toodaloo.